Major funding for Carolina Business Review is provided by Grant Thornton, an international accounting, tax, and business advisory organization dedicated to serving middle-market companies. Grant Thornton, a passion for the business of accounting. Novant Health, including Presbyterian in Charlotte and Forsyth in Winston-Salem, are affiliate heart hospitals of the Cleveland Clinic, consistently ranked #1 in the nation for heart care. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, proudly serving South Carolinians since 1946. And by Sonoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
It is always a good time to gauge how our region is faring from an economic development and a workforce point of view, especially given the distinctive situation of rising unemployment in the Carolinas, and yet many employers complain of not being able to find qualified workers. How does that work, and how does that square? Welcome back, and thank you for supporting and watching the most widely watched program on Carolina business and public policy. I'm Chris William, and from across the Carolinas, experts join us to discuss some of the issues most affecting our communities, and we will start in just a moment.
Major funding also by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation in Charlotte enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, health care, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising health care costs? Join Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. This edition of Carolina Business Review was recorded August 23, 2012. On this week's program, Loren Kennedy of Kennedy Advisors, LLC, Dr. Susan Peters of Francis Marion University, Natalie English of the Charlotte Chamber of Commerce, and Russell Stahl with Greenville Forward. Now, Chris William.
Okay, so welcome, gang. You know, we've heard, everyone talks about how the economy's doing, how they feel about how the economy's doing. From your point of view, and Natalie, I'm going to start with you. Unemployment's high, people unsure, middle class is getting challenged, credit, lending, housing seems to show some life. I mean, how would you kind of aggregate all of these things, and how do you feel about how things are going?
Well, I'll start by saying I think we don't know for sure until after the election. I think that we are at a point right now that folks are just pausing. That's what we're seeing and hearing around the chamber, and saying it depends. So, but prior to that, and I think after the election, I think we're in a slow recovery. I'm not afraid of falling back into a recession. Mm-hmm. Jobs are being created, certainly in this region and across the state of North Carolina. And we're seeing folks considering job offers where 3 years ago, everybody was afraid to even think about another job because they were just intent on keeping the one they had.
Yeah, Susan, how does that square with you?
I'd have to agree. I tend to be a little bit on the optimistic side. I think we're moving forward. It's not maybe as fast as we'd like to see it, but I think we're going in the right direction.
Yeah, Loren?
Yeah, I would agree with that. You know, I come at it from the point of view of a site consultant looking for companies that are looking to expand or move. And so it's been light the last couple of years. But I must say in the last year, projects are coming up, including one, by the way, that would be 200 jobs for a Chinese company building a $270 million plant. So from my point of view, that's really exciing. And,
is this a project that you're working on or that you know of that's kind of hanging out
I'm
there?
working on.
Okay. You want to give us the details of that? I asked that kind of rhetorically.
Very good, yeah.
Russell, what do you see?
Well, and we're very optimistic as well. In the upstate, we've been a little bit insulated from some of the downturn. We were named as one of the best places to weather the economic storm. And we've been able to diversify our economy, so we're no longer reliant on textiles anymore. And we've seen a lot of growth in, especially the small business sector, where there's some caution, but we're still very optimistic about where we're going.
You know, in the fact, you know, funny to hear you say that, Russell. You talk about we're not relying on the textile manufacturing or the old line textile manufacturing as we knew it. You know, the fact that you even have to say that almost is kind of a downer, if you will, because the Carolinas have been past that for a while. But I want to come back to something else, and specific to Greenville. I would say, Loren, up in your neck of the woods in Durham have done a great job. Charlotte in downtown, Columbia, Florence. Here, let's talk about urban centers for just a second. And all I can say about Greenville is wow. And I don't want to be overly optimistic or a bit of a Pollyanna, but this is, I mean, this really is a pretty amazing transformation for what had been a challenging economy in the upstate. How has that happened?
It's an amazing overnight 30-year transformation. Downtown Greenville was really started, that revitalization was started 30 years ago with Max Heller, who was mayor. And now it's turned into a mecca for young people, a mecca for new businesses, and a place that people want to be. We're very proud, and I think people that live in the upstate are very proud of downtown Greenville and own it. We just did a survey of Greenvillians, and one of the findings was 87% of people say that Greenville is a great place to live. And that's astounding.
Nice.
That is, you know, Charlotte, 15 years ago, Natalie, maybe even 10 years ago, you could have fired a cannon off in downtown Charlotte on a Saturday night and hit maybe one person. And here is the town that was clearly, and still is clearly, kind of the center of commerce for the Carolinas. How has Charlotte been able to do that? Was that banking? Was that the fact that there was so much growth population-wise? What was there one thing that did?
Oh, gosh, no. There were lots of things. I think that certainly banking played a role in the number of jobs that they had concentrated in the center city, but then also the public-private partnerships to build the assets and the amenities that attract young people, certainly, football teams, basketball teams, art museums. All of those things have contributed, and then to add mass transit. Public transportation is appealing to young people, and it's something they look for when they want to pick a place to live.
Susan, and what about the creative class? How does that factor into what we're talking about here?
I think that's very important. Downtown Florence is in the middle of a revitalization effort as well, and creativity is one of the main things. Art Trail Gallery, some of the other things that we're doing with artisans and things. I think they are the people who are more willing to take a chance and to invest in a downtown. So we've been moving that direction in Florence, and I think it's going to be a very good move for the city.
You know, on this program a few months ago, Stephen Wakila, right?
Wakila.
Yeah, mayor of Florence. I mean, here's a young guy who is just enthusiastic about being alive, and does it take not having traditional politicos in charge for that to happen in an urban center?
I would say there's never a one-size-fits-all. I think for Florence, this has been very good to revitalize the young people. Like many small more rural areas, you know, we get the flight. Oh, how soon can I get out of Florence? You know,
looking for a job. I'll take the job here, but I'm looking.
Right. So I think, you know, that really helps re-energize the people and know, yes, that Florence is a place for young people, and we are trying to work for that. And so I think he's a good face to have out there for what we're trying to do.
And Loren, what was the magic in Durham? How did that happen?
Yeah, I agree with these comments. I think both of you are right on about what happens. From my perspective, I represent corporations, and I have a special appreciation for CEOs that have some broader interest than just the company profits. I happen to have been the consultant on the American Tobacco Project 10 years ago, and that was the catalyst that has turned downtown Durham, into some place to go as opposed to some place to avoid. And but that was Mr. Goodman from Capital Broadcasting. He's the man who invested about $2 million before we could put the public-private partnership together. So he stuck his neck way out to try and redevelop downtown Durham. And there was a man here in Charlotte, wasn't there? I forget his name.
Hugh McCall.
McCall. He was the one that he started it, don't you think?
Yes, I do.
So I look for those executives that have that.
You know, that's interesting. American Tobacco, it wasn't long ago, beginning of the year, I was staying in downtown Durham at the Marion and asked a friend of mine who lives in Durham, where can I go that I'll be safe? You know, let me just blatantly say that. Where can I go that I'll be safe? Not from crime, but where can I go that I know it'll be okay and I'll have fun and it'll be a good place to be? And he said, well, clearly you haven't been to Durham because downtown Durham is that way now. How did a mature white guy who's been around forever, how did he drive that? What, is it just
Well,
about
it's-
the way Goodman is, or was there some other element outside of
Well,
him?
it's jobs and people. I mean, the deal that we struck, the development agreement that he signed, committed to 1,200 jobs, I think it was. And then he went to his friends that headed up GlaxoSmithKline, Duke University, and said, would you mind leasing a couple of 100,000 feet from us? And they signed. So there were several key executives that agreed to make all that happen. So then when you pump all those jobs downtown, then people will take more chances on the restaurants and other amenities. So my view is it's a ripple effect that happens with that first decision.
One thing that's really worked with us is the partnerships, the public-private partnerships, especially. We're tax averse. We don't like taxes in Greenville. We're very conservative. And so we've had to be very creative about finding ways to fund the arts, finding ways to fund infrastructure. And the people in Greenville have stepped up. We're very giving. We've given away a lot of money
philanthropically?
Philanthropically. And it also goes back to that ownership of people feeling like they're part of the community. I grew up in Greenville, and I left when I was 18 because there was nothing there that interests me. And it took me 16 years to come to my senses and come back. But the Greenville I left in 1978 is completely different than the Greenville that I came back to.
How do you do that?
14
Who do
years
they
ago.
give to? To the chamber, or what's the mechanism?
I guess one of the biggest is probably the Peace Center. The Peace Center for Performing Arts. It's one of the, in my opinion, one of the finest arts facilities in the country. And we're just very, very philanthropic in Greenville.
You know, Michael Reardon from Greenville Hospital System was on this program talking about the trail, the health trail.
Absolutely.
What is it, the swamp?
It's the GHS Swamp Rabbit Trail.
Swamp Rabbit Trail. Is there, and I know you're probably excited about it, but is it bona fide to say that that could be the next large developmental piece for Greenville?
Probably. When the trail was conceived, it was a battle.
Yeah.
And many of the things that have gone on have been a battle. One group doesn't think that it's the right thing to do. Swamp Rabbit is a great example of that. But now, in retrospect, it has saved Travelers Rest, which is a bedroom community to the north. And I think you're going to see a great deal of development happen around the Swamp Rabbit Trail, which is a converted rail line.
Which
through
goes
the whole
back
county.
to something you said about public transportation is kind of critical. I also want to come back to something you said, Natalie. You said, you know, everybody's on hold. We're not going to say anything until after the election, and rightly so. You get out over the end of your skis on this one, and you can be wrong. And let's talk about that for a second, and I'd like you all to wade in on this. You know, if the Republicans, if there ends up being a split Senate and the Republicans win the White House, then it's going to be a Republican-controlled, at least higher House in Congress. If the Democrats win, you know, ACA, Affordable Care Act, and many other things, and it's going to go another way. If we don't get this budget under control, or we get over the deficit cliff, you know, how do you, Natalie, how do you model, and not just in the Charlotte Chamber, but when you talk to others in the state, when you talk to government relation experts and those who are waiting and watching, as you said, how do you model, okay, we're going to be prepared to go this way, or we're going to be prepared to go this way? What is the modeling in your head here?
Wow, you know, it requires a lot of conversations, and we're seeing with some of our projects, companies in the financial services sector saying their increased investments or growth in jobs depend significantly on who's in the White House next term. But then on the other hand, we have members who invest high at a $5,000 level for us who are reconsidering whether they can even afford that, depending on who runs the state house and Senate or Congress. And so it requires a lot of conversations with people to understand what is motivating them from an issues perspective. And I tell people all the time I'm about this deep and this wide on issues. And so I rely a lot on people like you all who do what you do specifically to share information so that we can even think about. And modeling is almost out of the question for me. Spending so much time trying to keep up with what's happening in the elections and counting and the different scenarios, that the thought of, okay, then what happens hasn't even gotten to me yet.
So, Susan, when it comes to policy, again, this modeling question, how do how do you plan for this way in your curriculum or this way in your conversations with public policy leaders? What do you think?
Well, the truth of the matter is that both sides do have some things that are going to help business. Different sorts of mechanisms. You know, certainly some things are going to be better for the bigger businesses and the home runs. Some of them are going to be better for the homegrown entrepreneurs and things. So I think it is a little bit of a wait and see, and whichever way we go, you know, we can adapt. We can.
NBC Wall Street Journal poll released in mid-August came out with the pretty, not surprising, but still almost breathtaking number that 82% of America does not approve of the job that Congress has been doing. It's as long as that poll has been in existence, that's the lowest number, worst approval rating. You're nodding your head, Loren, with a smile here. So where can we go with this one? How does that affect when people have that low of confidence of those who set policy? Is that scary to you?
It is scary. It suggests what's happened, which is gridlock. And the problem that we all have is, if you have gridlock, how are you setting policy? How are you moving forward with the things that have to be done? So, in a word, it saddens me. But I would also add, I wonder about Americans. You know, I really wonder about, we're the ones that put them in. And so the ideology that they have reflects each segment of our society. So to me, it's a broader question about what do Americans want? You know, we're not as homogenized as we used to be, and I think the splintering has got people yelling at each other.
And I would say that that each of those groups is convinced that they have the right answer.
Right.
And there's
Yes.
no room for conversation
That's right.
and
That's what I see.
compromise. And
I
that
agree.
scares me more than anything.
Is that, yeah, but back to Loren's point, is that defective citizenship, or is that the fact that we just don't have the right people in
No,
office?
I said that's the groups of citizens
Yeah.
who believe what they believe about whatever the issue is and believe their answer is the only right answer. They've elected a representative that represents their views, and then another group that feels absolutely opposite to that. They've elected somebody who represents their views. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily who is in office. I believe our elected bodies represent our citizenry, so they're doing the jobs they've been sent to do. It's just that we're all so different, and we're so dug in.
There's a cultural change. We're much less willing to compromise. You know,
Yeah.
if I have to give in, then you're right and I'm wrong, and I'm not willing to go there. I'm not willing to say there's two ways of maybe getting to the same.
How did we find ourselves here, though? It hasn't always been this way, or has it?
You know, that's a good question. You know, people who study culture will say these things evolve over decade after decade after decade, and you know, it has just sort of crept up into this for a lot of different reasons. And you know, I would not be the person to give you all the whys and wherefores of that. But
Sure.
But back to your point on the poll, we did a similar poll when we were looking at creating a culture that values learning. And the poll numbers we got were 14% of Greenvillians thought that our elected officials are held accountable for education. The good news on the survey, however, is 87% say that they make the connection between economic development and education. So when we talk about community development, we've changed our language to be more along the lines of it's not location, 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 it's education, education, education. And if we're competing with other communities like Austin, where 52 or 54% of their population has a baccalaureate degree, we're challenged because 30% of our population has a baccalaureate degree. Spartanburg is 19%.
Right.
So we're at an automatic disadvantage when we're competing for companies moving in and workforce development.
Well, Russell, I want to come back. Tom Ross, who's the president of the UNC system, was on this program just a couple of weeks ago. And we posed the question to him, is the value of an education still there? And it was in the context of the spiraling cost of going to school, even at UNC, that's traditionally been, you know, the lowest cost point, USC with the lottery. And of course, President Ross said, yes, it is. But here's the other thing, is when you talk about qualified graduate, undergraduate students, young and old, working at Starbucks, where is the value of that education? How does that factor into it? And does everyone need a 4-year education?
The high
I
school
noticed you didn't
graduation.
want to answer that.
She looked away right away.
Yeah, she did, very coyly. I think that worked.
I personally don't think everyone does. A 4-year degree isn't for everyone. However, our high school graduation rates are abysmal. And how can we, but it's a deeper issue than that. It's creating a serious culture change of moving from our textile heritage, where you got out of school and then you went and worked in the family business or you worked in the mill, to now creating a culture where learning is not just a classroom. It's when you get out of the classroom, you're learning every day, you're learning all the time.
And there's a connection, too, between learning because I have to check off these boxes or jump these hurdles, and learning because I can use this my lifetime. And I know, as an educator, it's one thing I'm really trying to inspire my students that, okay, maybe you don't want to start a small business, but the skills you're going to learn in this class are going to serve you well in these other ways. So it's not so much learning so they can pass my exam, but learning so that they've got something that they can work on that. And this is, again, a cultural change, an attitude change. We've so much... I always talk about how the school systems in some ways beats out a lot of the creativity, color in the lines and do it this way, that we don't allow for people to really to think. And so they get up into college or into their jobs and we're saying, okay, be creative and think, and they're not really responding. So there's a lot of layers to this onion of education that need to be kind of examined.
I have another slant on it, which I haven't heard mentioned from these comments, and that is, I've seen some companies, and I've seen state economic development laws in our state that are unfavorable to blue-collar workers. So it's almost as if, on the one hand, we say we want to get everybody an education, but not everybody is cut out for a college education. High school, I like the idea of getting them finished through high school,
Right.
but there is an opportunity for us to try and train people for the trades, and I don't see a lot of evidence of that happening.
And my reluctance in answering the question was how it was phrased. And I agree that we have technical trade jobs that need to be filled that make a lot of money.
Yeah.
But my fear is that we will presume from where a child comes should determine that. And we cannot do that.
Okay, well, we could really go down this road, but 3 minutes, I want to bring the education piece back to a very unique situation. Natalie, I'm going to stay with you on this. The chambers of commerce across North and South Carolina have all said, on this program and in other places, that there is a dichotomy going on. We have high unemployment rate, but we have a whole bunch of people that can't find qualified workers. Is that to the point of the education piece, or is there some other issue going on here? If we've got 9.6% of people unemployed in the Carolinas on average, why can't they be placed?
It's a combination. In some cases, the jobs are so specialized, they require very specific training. And we have to work with, business has to work with our education institutions to ensure that we're providing that. On the other hand, as we are introducing technology in education and trying to reach children where they are today, we have to ensure that we don't lose sight of those soft skills like creativity, like collaboration, like team building and teamwork, so that when they come out, because that's some of the things we're hearing, folks who graduate are not ready to participate in those kinds of activities because they've been so focused on the learning and the checking the boxes that they haven't gotten.
And go
I was
ahead,
going to say,
Susan.
and the opposite thing is are the jobs there? I mean, if you're unemployed, is it because you don't have the right skill, or is it because there aren't jobs there to hire
But where's the
you?
creative thinking of somebody that's unemployed that says, I'm not qualified in that, but I'd like to learn how? Is it
Exactly.
that they don't have the time to do it? They don't have the money to invest in?
Money, they don't know where to go.
Yeah.
Sometimes I see a lot of people who just don't know where to start on a lot of things. And so, maybe I'll start a business, maybe I'll do this, and they need some guidance. They need people to come to that they can talk to and say, okay, where do I do now?
But there's
what goes
also
next?
an issue about is the option there in the schools. For example,
In primary or higher ed?
and all the way through. Where in the path of education of our youngsters do we help them steer themselves? Isn't there a decision somewhere along the way about what this person has for aptitudes and ability? My answer is no. And for example, one reason I know that is that the universities that I've been meeting with lately to find out if they have something for the trades, some place where they teach them the trades, teach them how to make things, the answer is largely no.
Yeah, it's going to have to be the last word, Loren. I wish we had more time. I mean, clearly, all very exciting, and thank you all for joining us. Loren, good to have you on the program. Susan, thanks for coming up from Florence. Russell, good to see you. Please come back. And Natalie, you're the reigning ballroom queen at the YMCA's in Charlotte. Are you going to continue that?
I have to perform again this year, yes.
Okay. You heard it. Until next week, good night. I'm Chris.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation in Charlotte enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton, an international accounting, tax, and business advisory organization dedicated to serving middle-market companies. Grant Thornton, a passion for the business of accounting. Novant Health, including Presbyterian in Charlotte and Forsyth in Winston-Salem, are affiliate heart hospitals of the Cleveland Clinic, consistently ranked #1 in the nation for heart care. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, proudly serving South Carolinians since 1946. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.com. Major funding for Carolina Business Review is provided by Grant Thornton, an international accounting, tax, and business advisory organization dedicated to serving middle-market companies. Grant Thornton, a passion for the business of accounting. Novant Health, including Presbyterian in Charlotte and Forsyth in Winston-Salem, are affiliate heart hospitals of the Cleveland Clinic, consistently ranked #1 in the nation for heart care. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, proudly serving South Carolinians since 1946. And by Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
The controversial firing of Bill Johnson immediately following the completion of the Duke Progress Energy merger made big headlines this past summer. And while that may be more strategically about social issues around the combined company, it does highlight the vulnerability and unresolved issues that can plague and easily happen at any firm, and in this case, at one of the nation's now largest energy companies. Thanks for watching the most widely watched source for Carolina business and public policy. I'm Chris William, and more broadly, energy and energy policy this time on CBR, and later on the CEO of the American Petroleum Institute, Jack Gerard.
Major funding also by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation in Charlotte enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. This edition of Carolina Business Review was recorded August 23, 2012. On this week's program, Jeffrey Merrifield of Shaw's Power Group, Willis Wichard of the Scientific Advisory Panel on Offshore Energy, and special guest Jack Gerard, President and CEO of American Petroleum Institute. Now, Chris Williams.
Welcome again. Thanks for being here. Jeff, good to have you on the program. Judge, welcome and thanks for coming. You know, I want to start with something here, Jeffrey, and I want to start with you. Recently, there was an NBC News Wall Street Journal poll that highlighted the fact that record lows, and I'll say it this way, 82% of respondents in this poll disapproved of the job that Congress has been doing, both the lower house and the upper house here. When you take that kind of disillusionment, maybe is a good way to say it, and you apply it to energy and energy policy, do you kind of groan inside and say, gosh, we need some energy reform here and now we're farther away from it? Or is there some opportunity in here? How do you look at those kind of statistics?
Well, I always try to be an optimist. It goes to the heart of your question, though. I mean, I think what Americans are seeing at this point in Washington is that Congress has gotten very good at not doing things. And there's really a mantra to stop things from happening. And I think what the American people are asking for is Congress to really focus on issues that matter. And for us, certainly, energy is clearly an issue that matters. There are changes that Congress can make to incentivize greater energy production here in the United States, and I think people want that to happen. I say I'm encouraged because hopefully when we have the turn of the year, we get through the election, we get a new Congress, we get an administration, whether it's the current one or Governor Romney taking over, hopefully we can get a refocus on energy issues and really move us forward, because it's an important economic driver we need to focus on. You know,
Judge, in the same context here, you just came out from, well, not just, but recently came out from underneath this special panel that you chaired for Governor Perdue in North Carolina, and you presented the report. Going through the process of this and looking at what energy and what energy policy going forward for the old North State is, how does what Jeff say, and how does the question that I originally asked, how does that square with you?
I think this is a great problem we have these days. I have a good friend who is a friend of Steny Hoyer, the number 2 Democrat in the House. He says he was talking to Steny recently and said it's small comfort to have your polling numbers at 5% when the Congress as a whole is 3%. It's better than that, but not much. I served 10 years in the state legislature. It wasn't this way then. We got together and worked things out. Some of the most important things I did, I had a substantial number of members of the other party supporting my legislation. So, as Jeff has said, hopefully when we get the presidential election behind us, if the president is reelected, he can't run again, maybe then people can get behind him and do the things that need to be done, or if we have a new administration, simply focus ahead in addressing energy and other problems that we're facing.
You know, I want to ask the question, and I don't think we have time to go down the road, but what happened to statesmanship? But we'll leave it there. Let's go to the heart of energy.
It's not what it was, that's for sure.
Yeah, clearly. The heart of energy in North Carolina, pretty landmark decision by the legislature this year, and that was to legalize fracking. Judge, I want to stay with you. Legalizing fracking in North Carolina does not mean that North Carolina is going to begin drilling right away. What does this mean going forward? Does this give North Carolina the first mover advantage? Does it open up many things? Is there going to be a challenge we haven't thought about? How do you look at this?
The legislation puts in place a process moving toward engaging in that endeavor. There is a commission that is in the process of being appointed that will govern and regulate the process, develop the rules and regulations. So I would say we have moved in that direction. Doesn't necessarily mean we're going to do it. I would think local governments are going to weigh in on this. I was with the mayor of Sanford earlier this week. That, of course, is an area where there is believed to be a lot of natural gas underground. The greatest concern she expressed about it was that so many of the places where they would do this drilling are very close to the river, and the river is the town's water supply. And the great concern that's been expressed about fracking is that it pollutes water, uses water, and we already know that we have a water shortage. I know a very eminent scientist who is absolutely convinced we're going to run out of water and it's too late to avoid that. Now, I hope he's wrong, but clearly we have a concern about water supply. So hopefully the folks regulating the process will take account of both economy and environment and find what we need to do.
I think on the fracking, you know, my background is originally environmental, and I think we can craft ways as a state, as states, and as a country to deal with air and water emissions from these facilities. The other part of the fracking discussion, though, is the jobs, and in this economy, you've got to talk about what does this mean. Obviously, initially, there's some drilling activities that would take place in various parts of the Carolinas, particularly North Carolina. You have the opportunities for building pipelines, pipe fabrication, you know, facilities. Our company operates some pipe fabrication facilities that are extensively used in the Gulf area. We have some located in South Carolina. Those would be the kind of facilities that would see a bump up in jobs as a result of that. We are, as a country now, we're looking at, given the huge sources of natural gas being provided by fracking, that we will get to a point where we'll be potentially a net exporter of gas in the United States. That means LNG facilities that could be built along the coast. That means a lot of chemical companies, which previously had shifted operations to the Middle East and Asia, are shifting those back to the U.S.
Would that lower the cost of energy in North Carolina, or would all that be exported and we would?
Well, absolutely. If you're a Piedmont Gas or other customer of gas, you're going to see a dip in your gas prices. One of the reasons that industries are thinking about coming back to the United States is because access to that lower cost energy, which is a major input for manufacturing, things like plastics, significant user of natural gas feedstocks, you know, that's not offshore anymore. That people are seriously thinking about bringing those in the United States. And those are the kind of manufacturing jobs that our country's really been begging for the last 10 years.
We're going to bring our guest on because we're clearly getting some traction here in policy and some of these things around energy development. Before we do that, next week on our program, as we head into a very interesting time politically in this country, and you could say historically, we will have our Carolina Politics Roundtable. Included in that is Winthrop University Prof. Karen Kudrowski, who's been on this program before. Out of South Carolina, there's a thing called State House Report. Andy Brack is the publisher. Andy will be on this program with us. Susan Roberts from Davidson College, a public policy and policy sci expert up there. And finally, from NC Free Enterprise, Jonathan Kepler will also be on this program. What happens to the world, our everyday life, when the flow of energy stops? You know that feeling when the power goes out in your house, or better yet, when the flow of energy is just disrupted for a day or a week due to some natural or other disaster. We know that feeling. When you really stop and think about it, though, it is truly amazing that for decades this country and our communities have had dependable flow of oil to continually power our lives, but to go a bit further, the implications of our oil extend way beyond keeping our iPads charged. It includes job creation, domestic energy policy, homeland security, among a list of other things. Joining us now is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the American Petroleum Institute, Jack Gerard. Jack, welcome south, and it's nice to have you here.
Thank you. It's great to be here today, Chris.
Jack, let's go back to something that happened in 2003, and I just found out prior to this program that this guy here was the interim chairman during this disaster at the NRC. In 2003, August of 2003, the Great Northeast Blackout affected 55 million people from the northeastern United States up through Canada. Does it take, and we just heard about the headlines, 600 million people in India affected by a blackout. Does it take this kind of being on the edge of chaos for us to implement some serious policy reform in energy? Or is there some other way that we're going to get to this?
Well, I think there's two answers to that, Chris. The first one is we certainly hope not. We certainly hope it doesn't take a crisis every time to get the public policy necessary or to get it right so we can move energy policy forward. The second aspect, though, that Jeff touched on just a moment ago is the job creation potential here. And I think that clearly has the public's attention. Just a week or so ago, we did another national survey that showed 92% of the American people understand that when we talk about oil and gas development, the business we're in, they recognize there's a direct correlation to job creation. And what we're seeing today in states like North Dakota, a lot of people don't know much about, second largest oil producer, The median income or wage in North Dakota in the oil and gas business is $90,000 a person. The median wage for everybody else in North Dakota, $45,000. So when you look at states like Pennsylvania, when you talk about natural gas development, the potential right here in the Carolinas to participate, we're talking about good, well-paying jobs at a time we need it most. So I think those issues are also going to come into play. You see the president talking about it. You see Governor Romney now talking about it. I think energy is going to be a hot topic going into the fall election. And I think the public's ready for a sound, comprehensive policy where we really start looking at our own resources like natural gas in the Carolinas and say, how do we put this forward, produce American energy by Americans for Americans? So I'm hopeful that economic dynamic will help push us to a sound policy.
Jack, would this be as an easy of a sell on policy reform if we hadn't gone through the Great Recession, if we didn't have these high unemployment numbers and a lot of pain?
Well, it's interesting. The public focuses on what's most important. At any given time, I think we're all focused on the same things. How we feed our families, how we put them through school, how we plan for our retirements. But what's happened today is the economic circumstance in this country, the adverse nature of it, has really got us laser focused on job creation and economic recovery. And I think when you attach to that this new energy equation, when you look at the potential in the United States today, we have never before, at least not in our lifetimes, seen what we have before us today. As a world economist said just a few months ago, if we get the policy right, the United States can become the new Middle East for energy production. As Jeff mentioned, we have the potential to not only produce everything we consume, but to potentially export it. Now we're not reliant on unstable parts of the world. We don't have to worry about what's going on in the Middle East for pure energy considerations. There are obviously other considerations we look at. We don't have to worry about the demand taking place in China.
If we get down that road on policy.
That's right. If we get there, and that's why I hope we can do it if we stay focused on it and think what's in the best interest of our country.
Jeff?
Well, Jack, one of the issues I think we've all seen is that there are extraordinary opportunities to produce energy in the United States, much of which is trapped on federal lands. You come from a state that has significant federal land holdings. More recently, the Obama administration has come out with some policies. Secretary Salazar has opened up part of the Naval Petroleum Reserve in Alaska for production, but left a lot of it aside. How do we get to a policy, a national policy, where we can, in an environmentally sensitive way, tap into those national assets that currently are off the table?
Well, I think it's really got to come from the ground up, and what I mean by that is I think the American people have to rise up and say enough's enough. For 30, 35 years in this country, we've had only over 85% of our outer continental shelf off limits. You look at the situation here in the Carolinas now, clear almost 2-to-1 support for development in the outer continental shelf. It's almost, 3 out of every 4 support for development onshore. And I believe the American people are better understanding the energy equation in this country, and I hope they do continue to rise up. What we're finding in our industry is we're communicating on a daily basis with people through the social media tools. I think the communication forms in society today have really changed the ability to engage this debate and elevate it such that we get to sound policy. If you look at where this administration has been, they've put 85% of our outer continental shelf off limits once again. Now that's unnecessary. We're the only industrialized nation in the world that does that. And then we wonder why we can't compete. It all comes back to energy. If you want that manufacturing base you talk about, affordable, reliable energy brings that back. And it benefits consumers. As you mentioned earlier, Chris, the result of natural gas going from $13 to about $3 today saves consumers about $500 million a day because of that price drop, almost a quarter of what we used to pay for it. So if we keep producing that domestically, we're going to pay less for our heating, our air conditioning, our electricity. And at the end of the day, the more money in our citizens' pockets, I think, drives this conversation. We ought to do more about it as a nation here at home.
Judge?
As a follow-up on Jeff's question, if you were an energy czar, a benevolent dictator with power to say where we explore offshore, what would your priorities be? What areas, and specifically, where would the offshore of North and South Carolina fit into this?
Well, I think, Judge, it's a great question because we do need to prioritize. I think the first priority needs to be a comprehensive policy that's truly in all of the above. Oftentimes people look at the oil and gas business and say, well, it's self-serving, you're just after your interest. Not true. We need wind, we need solar, we need all renewables, ethanols. The oil and gas industry are the single...
Nuclear, too.
And nuclear, I'm
Thank
sorry.
you, Jack.
I figured you'd represent that, Jack. But in that process, we need to recognize we need to develop all of them. The oil and gas industry are the single largest investors in all those renewable forms of energy. But when you look at priority, we have great experience in the Gulf of Mexico. We've been there about 60 years. We've drilled over 42,000 wells. We have produced about 8 times more energy in the Gulf of Mexico than anyone ever thought possible. Now, it's been 35 years since we've looked off the coasts of North and South Carolina. We're really not sure what's there, but the early indicators we had 30 years ago, it has promise. So we need to get back out there with modern technologies and take a look today with our 3D and 4D seismic to really find. So after the Gulf of Mexico, we'd look to the South Atlantic. Alaska just sits up there. Everybody knows there's vast resources. Unfortunately, the decision by the President, the National Petroleum Reserve, was an area set aside by the Congress to develop oil and gas, and the recent announcement by the administrations, they took half of that off limits. So we're going in the wrong direction. But the Carolinas have great potential, working with Virginia, strong support in your states, which surprises a lot of people. There's actually support on the coastline for this.
Jack, I want to come back to something that happened in 2008 in an industry that I know, and that is in banking. And what happened when banks got full control? You know, the Chinese wall between investment banks and general banking came down, and banks really, you could make the argument that ran amok. And I think many people are concerned. I think everyone will nod in agreement that, yeah, we need energy reform, and we should do some of these things here domestically. But there is a real concern, and they're not just Birkenstock and dreadlock folks. I mean, there is a real concern that not just petroleum, but energy is going to take this ball and really run with it and not worry about conservation or in the environment. So I guess how does the energy industry self-police and make sure that they don't keep stepping over a line?
Well, I think there's 2 answers to that, Chris, and it's a great question, because we've got to make sure the American people have confidence in the way we go about our energy development. And the first response to that, and the first dimension, is all the environmental laws apply to the oil and gas industry. So when we're talking about clean air, clean water, et cetera, we have to meet all the same standards other industries have to meet. In fact, there are unique statutes that apply only to the oil and gas development. The second part of that, as it relates to self-policing, the American Petroleum Institute that I represent was originally started close to 100 years ago as a standard-setting organization. And we have independent third-party certified groups that develop best practices. We set those out, and then we encourage regulators and other folks to adopt those best practices, which raises the standards for everybody in the industry. What a lot of people don't realize is, following the very unfortunate incident in the Gulf with the Macondo spill, the first thing the Department of Interior did was adopted our best practice to raise the standard on the entire oil and gas industry. So we recognize that's our responsibility as an industry. The only other thing I'd add, and this goes back to the judge's good work and others in looking at energy policy right here in the Carolinas, is as it relates to hydraulic fracturing, there's a lot of misinformation out there about our technologies. Hydraulic fracturing's been around for 65 years. We've drilled over 1.2 million wells with it, and there has never been a case of groundwater contamination as a result of hydraulic fracturing. So while we hear a lot of misinformation taking place, there are a lot of people who don't want development of fossil fuels who say a lot of things that aren't factual. So our hope and effort is to come out, to go on programs like yours and others that are widely viewed, and have a factual conversation about energy. We can produce in North Carolina, benefit the manufacturing communities and others, and we can do it protecting the environment and protecting our people that work in the industry. So that's part of our effort, is to have that dialogue, and you're absolutely right. We need to protect those assets as we move forward to develop this energy.
Jeff. Well, how do we get beyond though? One of the the talking points you always hear is, well, on any given parcel that one might explore, that's only going to provide 16 days of our national supply, and it's a clever way, I suppose, of folks who are opposed to some of this production to think about that. But it seems to me our production is really the inputs of oil and gas from a whole variety of locations. How do you counter those kind of challenges when people look at it on sort of a parcel by parcel basis with some of these areas?
Well, as a lot of people say, Jeff, and as you know, some would suggest all politics are local. So sometimes it becomes literally permit by permit. But when you look at it holistically and in the collective, you see great benefit to society generally. I like to use the case of North Dakota. Many people don't realize today North Dakota is the #2 oil producer in the United States. This year it surpassed Alaska and California. The only state ahead of them is Texas. But they now produce 640,000 barrels a day. Just 7 or 8 years ago, no one would have thought that possible. But what happened is the state came together, and this is all on private and state land by and large. On federal lands, there's restrictions and you can't access those lands. But on private and state land, they've come together. They've developed a very robust regulatory regime to protect the environment, protect their workforce. And what we're seeing today is little old North Dakota has a 2.9% unemployment rate. And many people go to North Dakota and you can't find the unemployed. McDonald's pays about $18 an hour. They give you a $1,500 signing bonus to go to work at McDonald's. And most times they have to shut them down a little early because they don't have enough workforce to take care of the people. Little towns of 12,000 are now 20,000 people. But it's a huge renaissance because of these modern technologies of hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling. And so when we look at it holistically, we can become energy self-sufficient right here in the United States in about a decade if we could produce our own energy. And it's got not only the benefits of job creation, revenue generation. The oil and gas industry contributes $86 million a day to the federal government. That could actually grow without any change in tax policy. So we look at deficits, we look at budget concerns in the country. Let's go back to allowing that economics to occur collectively, and it provides great benefits overall.
Let me ask we're running out of time, Jeff. We have less than a minute left, and I'm sorry, Judge, I'm going to have to take control of this back because we're running out of time. Just very quickly, Jack, please. And I hate to put you on the spot about trending oil prices, but through the balance of the year, would you expect the price at the pump going up, staying the same, or down?
We don't predict the price. It's difficult to know. If we could predict price, we wouldn't be doing the show today.
Okay.
But what you generally see is look closely at the crude oil cost and the factors that influence that. That's the primary driver that dictates the price of gasoline. If the instability in the Middle East were to settle down, if we as a country put our act together, produce more, it'll put downward pressure on that price.
Last word. Thank you. And thanks to the Charlotte World Affairs Council for sharing your visit here. Judge, thank you. Jeff, good to see you again.
Thanks again.
Until next week. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation in Charlotte enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton, an international accounting, tax, and business advisory organization dedicated to serving middle-market companies. Grant Thornton, a passion for the business of accounting. Novant Health, including Presbyterian in Charlotte and Forsyth in Winston-Salem, are affiliate heart hospitals of the Cleveland Clinic, consistently ranked #1 in the nation for heart care. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, proudly serving South Carolinians since 1946. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.com.